The rain had no mercy that night. He was crouched beside a stalled car, soaked to the bone, his beige shirt clinging to his skin like a second layer of punishment. His hands, rough, calloused and trembling slightly from the cold, worked the rusted bolts under the hood with careful precision. Cars passed by without slowing. No one stopped, except him. She stood nearby, arms crossed, coat drenched, clearly frustrated. Her eyes scanned the darkness as if hoping someone more qualified might appear. But no one did. Only him. He didn't ask for her name, didn't ask for money. Just quietly said, "Let's see if we can get you moving again." What neither of them knew at that moment was this. She wasn't just any woman stranded on a dark road. She was Isabel Munro, founder and CEO of one of the most powerful tech empires in the country. And he was no ordinary man. She had just left a private gala at a luxury hotel downtown, where millionaires toasted to ideas they barely understood. Her driver had taken the night off. His wife was in labor, and in an attempt to prove she could be normal, she insisted on driving herself. The irony wasn't lost on her when the engine sputtered and died on a deserted street 10 minutes later. The man, beige shirt, muddy jeans, broken boots, had appeared from the gas station across the road. No umbrella, just an old canvas bag, and a strange kind of calm. He didn't even ask what happened, just started looking, and yet the look in her eyes said it all. Who is this guy? Why is he even helping me? She didn't trust easily, especially not someone who looked like that. As the minutes dragged on, the rain turned into needles. Her phone had no signal. Her designer heels were ruined, and this stranger, with grease on his cheek and water dripping from his hair, still hadn't stopped trying. "Almost there," he mumbled. She almost rolled her eyes, but then the engine roared to life. Just like that. He stepped back, smiled faintly, and nodded. Should hold for now, might need a proper checkup tomorrow. Before she could offer a thank you or an excuse, he was already walking away, disappearing into the night like some misplaced ghost of goodness. She stared at the glowing dashboard, stunned. Not because the car worked, but because he never even asked her name. What kind of person does that? That night she didn't sleep. The next morning, Isabel arrived at the towering glass headquarters of Munro Systems with a thought she couldn't shake. Who was that man? Her assistant was already briefing her on the day's meetings, but she interrupted. "Get me the footage from last night. Street cams, gas station cameras, anything." She needed to find him, but she wasn't the only one making a bold move that morning. At that same moment, a man in a beige shirt stood quietly in the reception area of Munro Systems, holding a small binder. Inside was a handwritten proposal and a dream. He had no idea what was coming next. His name was Ethan Granger, and if you passed him on the street, you'd probably forget his face in seconds. He blended into the background like a rusted park bench, always there, quietly useful, never demanding attention. Beige shirt, worn jeans, hair that hadn't seen a salon in years. But inside, Ethan carried a weight most wouldn't survive. He lived in a converted tool shed behind his friend Leo's auto shop, rent-free as long as he helped around. At Tus night, the place smelled of gasoline, wet cardboard, and sometimes, if the wind was right, fried chicken from the diner next door. Ethan didn't mind. He said it smelled like honest living. But what most didn't know, not even Leo at first, was that Ethan was the founder and heart behind something far greater, the Granger Wheels Foundation. Years ago, after losing his sister to a car accident, caused not by recklessness, but by an old failing brake system she couldn't afford to fix, Ethan vowed to make sure that never happened to someone else. He didn't have money, only hands that knew engines and a heart that refused to rust. He started fixing cars for free, not for everyone, but for people like Mrs. Daniels, the 82-year-old who visited her late husband's grave every Sunday and couldn't afford new tires. For Melina, a single mother of 3 who worked night shifts at the hospital and once broke down at 2 a.m. with her baby in the back seat. Ethan once walked 6 miles just to bring her a can of gas. He never posted online. Never asked for donations, he just worked, quietly, constantly. But that kind of life doesn't come without doubts. Some nights Ethan would lie awake on his stiff cot, staring at the ceiling with a question lodged in his chest like a splinter. Am I really making a difference? Or just patching holes in a sinking ship? Especially after the things people said. They'd look at his clothes, his old boots, the dirt under his nails, and assume he had failed at life. That he was lazy, that he didn't try. No one ever imagined he chose this. that he gave up a promising engineering career to chase something quieter but bigger. He remembered once, while fixing a dented bumper, a man in a suit slowed his car and shouted from the window, "Maybe if you got a real job you wouldn't be crawling on sidewalks." That stuck with him, and sometimes it hurt more than he admitted. But then he'd remember Eli, a 7-year-old boy with cerebral palsy whose wheelchair-accessible van broke down in the dead of winter. Ethan drove 9 hours straight to fix it, for free, because the boy's grandmother called him crying. She said Ethan was her last hope. He never told anyone about that trip, just smiled when Eli sent him a thank you drawing in crayon, a crooked heart, and the words, "Super Ethan." That drawing still hangs on the wall of the shop, taped next to an old clock that hasn't worked in years. He said he liked it that way. The stopped clock means I get to pick what moment matters. That morning when he entered the Monroe Systems lobby, he wasn't thinking about impact or legacies. He was just hoping someone would read his binder. It had hand-drawn blueprints, ideas for mobile mechanic units, community repair buses and training programs for struggling teens who wanted to learn a trade. His dream was to replicate his little garage all over the country. One shop in every state, hope on every corner. But as he stood there, ignored, wet from the rain again, binder clutched like a lifeline, no one looked twice, until one man did. Tall, smug executive with a perfect tie and a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, Gregory Sloan. And what Gregory said would be impossible to forget. Gregory Sloan didn't even bother to pretend kindness. He spotted Ethan standing in the lobby, wet shoes squeaking slightly on the marble floor, binder held tight against his chest, and walked straight toward him with the confidence of someone who owned everything he touched. "Can I help you?" Gregory asked, dragging out the word help like it was a joke. Ethan cleared his throat. "Yes, I have an idea I wanted to share. It's for..." Gregory held up a hand. "Let me guess, you're here about one of our janitorial positions?" A few nearby assistants chuckled. One even pulled out her phone, maybe to record, maybe just out of habit. Ethan's ears burned. His fingers tightened on the binder. "No, sir, I'm here to present a social initiative. I believe it aligns with your company's values." Gregory's laugh cut through the air like a slap. "Our values," he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Son, do you even know where you are?" Ethan looked past him for a second, toward the elevator, the one he'd imagined stepping into, maybe even getting to speak to someone who could help. But Gregory was already shaking his head. "This is a tech corporation," he said, voice louder now, drawing eyes from across the lobby. "Not a charity drive for broken-down grease monkeys." That line hit harder than expected. Grease monkey. He hadn't heard that since high school, since they laughed at him for taking vocational classes while the others applied to Ivy Leagues. And just like that, the memories flooded in, being told he was too smart to waste his time with engines, being left out of career fairs, being made to feel small again and again just because his hands were calloused instead of clean. Ethan nodded once, quietly. "Okay," he said, but Gregory wasn't done. He stepped closer, looking down at Ethan's shoes. "And next time, if you want to beg for attention, maybe wear something that doesn't smell like axle grease." That stung more than Ethan wanted to admit. He turned to leave, binder still, in hand, heart heavier than it had been in years. As he stepped outside, the wind slapped rain across his face like punishment. He didn't rush, just stood there a moment. He wanted to throw the binder away, drop it in the trash and forget he ever believed he could do more. And for a second, he almost did. What am I doing? Who am I kidding? These people don't care. They don't see me. He looked at the sidewalk, puddles reflecting the building behind him. I should just go home, patch up the next brake line, fix the next muffler, stay where I belong. But then, a voice, not from inside the building, from memory, a voice that once belonged to his sister before she died. She used to say it every time. Life knocked him down. "Don't you dare let suits define your worth, Ethan." He took a deep breath, didn't cry, not quite, but the lump in his throat stayed all the way home. That night, he didn't eat, didn't sleep, just sat at his workbench under the flickering light bulb, flipping through the binder page by page, wondering if any of it meant anything at all. He didn't know that someone else had seen everything. Isabel Monroe had watched the scene from the second-floor glass walkway. She saw Gregory's arrogance. She saw Ethan's posture shift from hope to humiliation, and something in her cracked. Not just guilt, not just curiosity, something deeper. She had spent years surrounded by people who wore masks of charm and knives in their smiles. But this man, this drenched, quiet stranger, he didn't ask for anything, not even when he had every reason to. She turned to her assistant. "Find out who he is," she said. Tonight, Isabel Munro was not easily moved. She had been raised in boardrooms and battlefields of business. Trust to her was a broken concept, something people dangled like bait. But that night, something about that man in the beige shirt lingered like a thread she couldn't pull free from. She didn't know his name, not yet, but she remembered the way he worked under the rain, the way he left without waiting for thanks, the way he didn't flinch when mocked in her lobby. So while the city slept, Isabel sat in her penthouse office, watching grainy footage from traffic cameras and security feeds. Her assistant had found the name on a work order Ethan once submitted at a gas station. That was enough. Ethan Granger. She whispered it out loud. It felt unfamiliar, honest. A quick background check revealed almost nothing. No social media, no interviews, just scattered records, auto repairs, permit renewals, a few mentions in local news about free vehicle services for at-risk populations. But then one article stood out. It was from a small town blog, written 3 years ago. The headline read, "The man who fixes without asking why." Isabel clicked, and there he was, smiling awkwardly beside a rusted van, handing a set of keys to a trembling woman in her 40s with a baby on her hip. The story explained how Ethan had rebuilt her entire transmission with recycled parts after learning she had been walking 10 miles to work. At the bottom of the article, one sentence stopped her. He says his sister taught him that real help doesn't come with receipts. Isabel leaned back, arms crossed, staring at the screen. She had launched a billion-dollar tech empire before age 35. She had survived betrayal, lawsuits, buyouts, but none of that prepared her for the quiet flood of emotion she felt. Reading about a man who chose kindness in silence, she made a decision. The next morning she left her office early. No entourage, no chauffeur, just her and a simple black coat. She told her assistant she needed a walk. That walk led her to a rundown street near the edge of the industrial zone. Graffiti, closed shutters, stray cats, nothing corporate. Nothing curated, and there it was, a modest garage with a crooked sign that read, "Granger Wheels, fix what matters." She stepped inside. The smell hit her first, oil, metal, and coffee that had been on the burner too long. Then the sounds, a socket, French clicking, an old radio humming a blues tune, and a soft voice saying, "Easy, Ms. Daniels, we'll have you back on the road before sunset." She froze. Ethan was kneeling beside a small sedan, gently talking to an elderly woman with silver hair and trembling hands. Isabel stayed hidden behind a stack of tires, just watching. Ms. Daniels clutched her purse like a lifeline. "You sure I don't owe you anything, Ethan? I could—" He shook his head. "You've paid more than enough in your life. Let me take it from here." The woman smiled, the kind that came from being seen. Isabel felt a knot in her throat. She watched Ethan place a blanket over Ms. Daniels's lap while she waited, then disappear into the back to fetch a part. This wasn't PR, this wasn't marketing. This was real. She looked around the garage. On the wall, above the cluttered desk, hung a child's drawing of a man in a cape. Crayon letters spelled, "Super Ethan," and suddenly the man who had seemed invisible in her lobby felt larger than life. She stepped back outside without saying a word. She wasn't ready to talk to him, not yet, but now she knew exactly what she had to do. 3 days later, the annual Munro Systems Social Impact Summit filled the company's vast auditorium. It was a glossy event. Spotlights, velvet ropes, catered hors d'oeuvres, reporters with badges, executives rehearsing their applause. Gregory Sloan stood near the stage, straightening his tie and preparing for what he assumed would be his moment to shine. He had no idea. Isabel Munro stepped on stage to thunderous claps, dressed in a sleek navy suit. She looked like a queen, reclaiming her throne, but there was something different in her eyes, softer, sharper. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice steady. "Today isn't about our profit margins or our market growth. It's about something far more valuable, purpose." She paused. "Over the past few months, we've explored dozens of potential partners for our new Community Uplift initiative. But I found someone this week who reminded me what real impact looks like." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gregory smiled, expecting to be named. Isabel continued, "I met this person not through a conference or a proposal, but because my car broke down in the rain, and someone decided to help. Not because of who I am, but because of who he is." Gasps, whispers, Then a spotlight shifted to the back of the room. Ethan Granger stood frozen, binder in hand, completely unprepared for the attention. Someone had brought him in quietly through a side entrance. His shirt was pressed but still beige. His shoes still carried dust from the street. People turned to look, some with curiosity, others with disbelief. Isabel's voice softened. "He doesn't know I'm doing this, and he never asked to be seen, but the world needs to see him." She waved him forward. Reluctantly, Ethan stepped toward the stage. His steps were slow, unsure. When he reached the stairs, she offered her hand. Ethan Granger is the founder of a small grassroots repair initiative for vulnerable communities. He's changed more lives in silence than some of us have with entire departments. The room was silent now, respectful, awed. "I'm proud to announce that Monroe Systems will not only fund the expansion of his program nationwide, but we will also integrate his model into our employee volunteer platform. Ethan's work will inspire a new division, one rooted in action, humility, and heart." Gregory's smile vanished. Isabel glanced at him. Just once. Nothing more than a flicker. No public call-out. No insult. Just the truth, rising above his arrogance like sunlight through fog. She turned back to Ethan. He opened his mouth, maybe to speak, maybe just to breathe, but instead he reached into his binder and pulled out a single drawing, crayon lines, a crooked heart. "Super, Ethan." He held it up. No speech, just that. The audience rose in standing ovation. The ripple effect began the next morning. By 9 a.m., news outlets were calling Ethan the man who fixed more than engines. Photos of his crayon drawing flooded social media. Community leaders, mayors, even national non-profits reached out, offering partnerships, donations, and awards. But Ethan didn't answer his phone. He was under a car, replacing brake pads for a nurse who couldn't afford a mechanic. Fame didn't change him. If anything, it embarrassed him. He didn't know how to brand his kindness or give a soundbite that fit into 30 seconds. He just wanted to work and let his hands speak. But while Ethan stayed grounded, the building he'd once been turned away from was now forced to shift. Monroe Systems launched the Granger Initiative across 8 cities in a single week. Isabel redirected entire budgets. Training programs were built using Ethan's old binder. Each slide, every pencil-written note was studied like scripture. Employees were encouraged to volunteer, not with incentives, but with purpose. And for the first time in years, the company felt human. Gregory Sloan, however, didn't adapt. In meetings, he rolled his eyes. He questioned the ROI of helping poor people with car troubles. He even suggested, behind closed doors, that Ethan was likely just a publicity plant. One afternoon, in a small executive meeting, he said, "This guy, he's a mechanic with a savior complex, you'll see." He didn't know Isabel was listening. She waited until he finished, then said evenly, "Gregory, when was the last time you fixed anything for someone who couldn't repay you?" Silence. "I don't mean a favor for your neighbor. I mean something that cost you sleep, that cost you pride." He didn't answer. She nodded. "That's what I thought." A week later, Gregory was reassigned. Quietly, without drama, no public humiliation. Just a closed door that never reopened. Ethan never asked about him, never mentioned the humiliation. When a reporter brought it up, he simply said, "Sometimes people treat you poorly because they've forgotten what it's like to be small." He could have torn Gregory down, but he didn't. Instead, Ethan focused on the new recruits, young men and women who showed up to the first training session with nervous eyes and oil-free hands. He taught them like he was handing over a piece of his soul. "This," he said, holding a wrench, "isn't just a tool, it's a bridge between someone stuck and someone moving again." He shared stories of Ms. Daniels, of Eli, of the night he almost gave up. One student raised his hand and asked, "Why didn't you?" Ethan paused. Then, with a smile that held 10 years of ache and beauty, said, "Because someone once believed in me, and I decided that was enough." Outside, Isabel watched through the glass window, unseen. She didn't interrupt. She just stood there, arms crossed, remembering that night in the rain, and the man who chose to stay when no one else did. Recognition came whether Ethan wanted it or not. He received an award from the city council, which he accepted in the same beige shirt, pressed this time, but still familiar. The mayor shook his hand. Cameras flashed. But Ethan looked more comfortable, holding a wrench than a microphone. His short speech was awkward. "Honest, I fix cars. But sometimes, it's not about the car." People clapped. Some cried. After the ceremony, An elderly man approached him in tears, holding a worn-out wallet. Inside was a photo of a teenage girl. She died because her brakes failed. I always blamed myself and for not checking them. But what you're doing, what you are, it matters more than you know. Ethan didn't have words. He just hugged the man, and maybe that was the answer. Meanwhile, Isabel continued to lead with quiet determination. She diverted corporate bonuses to fund emergency auto repairs for low-income families, created scholarships in Ethan's name, pushed executives to visit the garages themselves, not for PR but for perspective. And people changed, not because they were told to, but because they saw something real. One afternoon, Isabel joined Ethan at his original garage. She sat on an old milk crate while he replaced a timing belt. "You know," she said, watching him, "you're probably one of the most powerful people I've ever met." He chuckled softly. "I still can't figure out the coffee machine." She laughed, full and genuine, the kind that feels like exhaling a weight you didn't know you were carrying. "I meant power the way it should be. Quiet, relentless, useful." Ethan looked at her, a smudge of oil across his forehead. I don't want people stuck anymore," she nodded. "Then let's keep moving." And so they did. Week after week, new garages opened, new lives were touched. The original shop remained, the beating heart of a growing body. Ethan never left it. He said it reminded him why he started. One day, Melina, the single mom whose car he once fixed at 2 a.m., dropped by with her now 10-year-old son. He handed Ethan a drawing. It was a newer version of the same old crayon picture, but this time, the cape was longer, the heart brighter, the words still super. Ethan pinned it next to the first. Didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes said everything: tears, applause, flashbulbs. But Ethan only saw one thing: Isabel, nodding slowly, like she finally understood something she'd been chasing for years. After the event, she walked with him outside. They stood beneath the same sky where the rain had first brought them together. But this time, the clouds had cleared. He looked at her and said quietly, "You didn't have to do all that." She smiled. "Neither did you." They didn't say anything else for a while. They didn't need to. There's something we often forget in a world that celebrates noise. The quiet ones are still building. While we chase titles, trends, and attention, there are men like Ethan who kneel in the rain, fix what's broken, and never ask to be seen. Not because they lack ambition, but because their ambition is different. It's not about being known, it's about being useful. Ethan Granger never wore a suit, never asked for credit. He didn't shout about change. He became it, in silence, in grease-stained clothes, with hands that carried the weight of other people's problems without complaint. And isn't that the kind of strength we need more of? In a world where value is often mistaken for appearance, where people are judged by their clothes, their accent, the shoes they wear, or the car they drive, Ethan is a reminder that character has no uniform, dignity has no brand, and kindness doesn't need permission. His story teaches us that greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up in a beige shirt, with calloused hands and a binder full of dreams. So the next time you see someone who looks like they don't belong in a certain place, ask yourself, what if they've built more with their silence than others have with a microphone? What if the most powerful soul in the room is the one who didn't come to impress, but simply to help? And what if the world isn't broken because we don't have enough genius, but because we forget to value goodness? There are Ethans everywhere, and maybe, just maybe, the world could change a little faster if more of us decided to fix what matters, even when no one's watching.